Tonight, deadly gun violence plaguing the nation.
We need to have a national bill really implemented. I don't understand why there would be any resistance.
How the White House is looking to keep communities safe amid a wave of shootings.
It felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
The House Select Committee investigating the January 6 Capitol riot takes tonight's hearing to prime time. What to expect? And
shame on them for scaring women who need care.
Why some healthcare professionals are concerned with the messaging from abortion advocates after the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A COVID diagnosis delays the president's speech on gun violence. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Abigail Robertson.
In Washington, D.C., I'm John Jessup. Well, at the start of the year, White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci predicted just about everybody will get infected with COVID. Today, it caught up with the commander-in-chief. While the White House says President Biden has mild symptoms, today's diagnosis delays a new push outlining how to cut down on gun violence.
Calling it the Safer America Plan, the administration says additional funding will go to support law enforcement and crime prevention. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now with the new details of the plan.
Caitlin, this comes as Americans demand the government step up and do more to prevent mass shootings.
Yes, and this uproar follows a series of those events. The Buffalo Supermarket, the Uvalde Elementary School, the 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois. According to a new CNN poll, nearly 70% of adults believe the government and society can take effective action to prevent this kind of violence. The key to make it happen, however, is lawmakers need to find some common ground.
Will our Republican colleagues choose to defend the weapons of choice for mass murderers and those who seek to target law enforcement? Will they choose to defend tools designed to kill as many people as possible?
The Democrats' beef is with the Second Amendment. If you want to change you want to get rid of the Second Amendment, go try a constitutional amendment. See how far you get with that.
Despite their differences, Congress passed a bipartisan gun safety bill back in June, the first significant gun control legislation in 3 decades. Still, a majority of Americans want more action, and Democrats say the answer is a ban on assault-style weapons.
I don't believe AR-15 is just another gun. I think it is a killing machine, and we have ample testimony under oath that it is. And we sell them by the millions in this country, by the millions. I can't explain that.
Republicans argue taking away guns from law-abiding citizens won't fix anything, and instead advocate providing more law enforcement, ramping up school security, and investing in mental health.
Target the bad guys, target the felons, target the fugitives, target those with serious mental illness, prosecute them, put them in jail. When they try to illegally buy firearms, prosecute them and get them off the street.
As lawmakers debate, President Biden's upcoming budget proposal calls for $35 billion to support law enforcement and crime prevention efforts. According to the White House, the Safer America Plan will focus on funding for police departments, preventing crime by investing in services that help address the root causes, promoting a fairer criminal justice system, and getting dangerous firearms off the street and out of the hands of criminals. The president also supports a ban on assault-style weapons, and House Democrats are moving forward a bill that does just that. It's unclear if the legislation has enough support to pass a floor vote, and Republicans say it's very unlikely to make it through the Senate. Abigail, John?
All right, National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke. Thanks, Caitlin. Well, Rev Robert Shank is an author, minister, and the president of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute, and he joins us now for more. Reverend Shank, welcome. You know, all the way back in 2019, you wrote an opinion piece for The Hill titled, "It's Morally Negligent to Ignore the Mounting Gun Threat to Human Life." 3 years later, how much more pressing do you think the issue is today?
Far more. First of all, we know more. More reporting is getting out. There have been these mass shooting incidents, one after the other. And while overall gun violence has remained about the same over that period of time, there have been these far more spectacular and gruesome incidents that tells all of us this isn't far from our doorstep. If it hasn't touched you already, it likely will, at least indirectly in the future. This is a real moral crisis, and we need to respond to it. And that means everybody, not just government.
And Reverend Shank, what do you think the role of the church is when it comes to this issue of gun violence?
Well, the church is a place of healing. It's certainly a place of moral formation. And, you know, when it comes to any congregation, you have a large number of people in front of you, whether you count that as 50 or 15,000. There are people out there who are struggling. If you look at the 45,000 annual deaths due to gun violence of one sort or the other, half are murders, half are suicides. Those are two areas of human need, suffering and sin, that the church knows something about and is uniquely equipped to address. So if pastors and church leaders take this on as a major priority and they train and equip the church to respond to it, I think it can be a very, very positive force to at least ameliorate suffering and maybe even reduce this scourge of violence in our culture.
I think no one will disagree with you about the church being uniquely qualified and equipped to minister to those needs. Reverend Shank, while we have you, I know you've described your pro-life stance on gun violence as your third conversion. Speaking of pro-life, in the wake of overturning Roe as a constitutional right, you confirmed a behind-the-scenes effort to influence justices on the court. Now, though, you believe things need to change in terms of ethics on the court. As someone who's pro-life and helped to bring about that sea change at the high court, why the reversal?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is, as I've grown older, hopefully a little wiser, I've looked back and seen that some of my zeal was not necessarily well placed, especially when it came to the court. You know, when I first started working there as a missionary to top elected and appointed officials, we had a very clear mission to affect their hearts and their minds with the Word of God, with prayer. As time went on, I found my own work becoming more and more politicized, and instead of my prayers being punctuated with prophetic content, they became more and more punctuated by political content, and I regret that. I think there's a place for all of us to say sometimes we do things right and sometimes we do them wrong. And I think this betrayed that the court is a little too porous and maybe needs a stronger ethical code. And I'm a poor messenger for that, but I think it's worthy of our investigation.
Reverend Shank, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Always my pleasure.
Thanks, Reverend Shank. Well, a deep dive into a history-making 187 minutes. Tonight, the January 6th House Select Committee holds another primetime hearing, this time focusing on a minute-by-minute breakthrough of what then-President Donald Trump did or did not do during and after the Capitol attack. CBN senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener is on Capitol Hill now with a preview. Tara, what can we expect?
Well, John, this is expected to be a very dramatic 2-hour hearing. The panel making its case of what they call Donald Trump's dereliction of duty.
It's been the honor of my lifetime. Tempers must be cooled and calm restored.
In that pre-recorded message after the deadly riot, he condemns the attack and requests a peaceful transfer of power. But the committee says it was a different story behind the scenes. There are reports some previously unaired footage of Trump's response could be shown tonight. Committee members also say they'll play more of the interview from Trump's White House counsel, who reportedly pleaded for him to send rioters home. The committee is also calling on 2 former Trump officials to testify. Both resigned right after the attack, John.
Tara, we also know that the DOJ is still investigating the Capitol attack, but there's also some criticism there.
Right. There's been a number of people who said the DOJ is moving simply too slow during this investigation and also criticizing it for not targeting senior officials. John, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, had this to say about it.
No person is above the law in this country. Nothing stops us.
Even a former president.
I don't know how to, maybe I'll say that again. No person is above the law in this country.
Now, the DOJ has charged more than 850 people for their roles in the Capitol attack. John?
All right, we'll be keeping an eye on tonight's hearing. Thank you so much, Tara.
Well, for most of America, it's incredibly hot. More than 85% of the country is bracing for temperatures above 90 degrees from tonight through the weekend. Some 24 states are under excessive heat alerts. Parts of Texas and Oklahoma seeing temperatures as high as 115 degrees. It's estimated around 60 million Americans will face triple digits in the next week. City and state leaders are asking residents to use extreme caution during these high heat conditions.
Coming up, do abortion restrictions translate into death sentences for women with certain health conditions? Why some doctors are pushing back against what they call post-Roe misinformation. Next on Faith Nation.
Welcome back. A majority of Americans want to take action to protect access to legal abortions. New polling from the Associated Press and National Opinion Research Center finds 60% feel that way. The party breakdown shows 85% of Democrats and 57% of independents want congressional action, while only 32% of Republicans agree. Speaking last night at a South Carolina church, former Vice President Mike Pence said the fight over abortion in America is truly just beginning.
Standing here in the first days of post-Roe America, we must resolve that we will not rest, we will not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state in the nation.
Well, that same poll Abigail just mentioned also found 55% feel anger about the Supreme Court ruling. Among that segment, some point to greater danger of women dying due to complications with their pregnancies.
But as CBN News medical reporter Lori Johnson reports, some doctors say there's a lot of misunderstanding about the issue.
Abortion advocates across all media falsely claim doctors in states with abortion restrictions are not allowed to end a pregnancy to save the mother's life. Ectopic pregnancies are most often the subject of this misinformation. An ectopic pregnancy is a rare condition when the baby begins to grow outside the mother's uterus. The child cannot survive an ectopic pregnancy, and if left untreated, it could cause the death of the mother as well.
Unfortunately, the American people have been gaslighted by the abortion industry.
Doctors are pushing back on what they call fear-mongering.
Well, this is just a false dialogue. Every state that has put abortion restrictions into place has an exemption for a life-threatening condition for the mother, and many of them specifically mention ectopic pregnancy.
That means if needed, doctors will end a pregnancy even in states with abortion restrictions. But it's not as common as some might think.
It is hardly ever necessary to straight out perform an abortion to save a woman's life.
Aside from ectopic pregnancies, there are two other primary medical conditions when a doctor anywhere in America can legally separate an unborn child from its mother: severely high blood pressure called preeclampsia, or when the water sac ruptures too early.
And the reason we do that is not to intentionally kill the baby. The reason we do that is to save the mother's life. Because if we don't separate the mom and baby under those circumstances, both the mom and the baby die. Whereas if we separate them, then the mom has a chance to live. But this is very different than the intent of an elective abortion. An elective abortion is done specifically for the purpose of producing a dead baby.
The good news is, thanks to modern medicine, if the pregnancy is at least about 5 months along, the baby can likely survive outside the womb. So pregnant women shouldn't be afraid to seek medical attention.
I really appreciate the opportunity to clarify this tremendous misinformation and scare tactic that's being done on the other side. Shame on them for scaring women who need care.
So while doctors can still end pregnancies to save the mother, even where abortion is restricted, it's not something widely reported in the press.
I think the media has been biased in favor of abortion pretty much since 1973 at least. All of that reporting about how women will die. Somebody dies in an abortion.
Media watchdogs point to a pattern.
Violence against pro-life centers, pro-life advocacy group offices, vandalism at Catholic churches. These are stories that they're not interested in doing. You know, they're talking about how women will die while the pro-choice folks are throwing Molotov cocktails into offices. And they've vaguely been supportive of the idea of protesters outside the homes of Supreme Court justices who are pro-life.
So while the abortion debate rages on, one thing is certain. Doctors are allowed to end a pregnancy to save the mother's life, even in states with abortion restrictions, despite a misinformation campaign to the contrary. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Becoming the world's top superpower has been China's mission for decades. While some predicted the communist nation would overtake America, recent developments are challenging that assumption.
That's right, from human rights abuses to a plummeting economy and aging population. As CBN's Dale Hurd reports, China faces mounting problems.
Chinese young people are asked if they want to have children. This woman lists all the ways children are a bother. This fellow says none of his married friends plan to have children. And while this woman says she'd like to have a child, her husband said he'd rather have a car. With its population plummeting and its economy struggling, the nation once viewed as an unstoppable juggernaut is now being called a declining power. China's global influence appears to be shrinking as nations object to its human rights abuses. More and more companies pull their production facilities out of China. And even China's tiny Pacific neighbors reject an alliance with it.
Experts had told us that this century would be the Chinese century, as China became the world's top economic superpower. But that is looking less and less likely.
These are the gleaming images of modern cities that China wants the world to see. This is literally how the other half lives. At least half of Chinese workers still only make about $150 a month. This year, the U.S. economy is forecast to grow faster than China's for the first time since 1976. A real estate crash that wiped out investments and savings, combined with soaring inflation and a badly handled COVID crisis, now threaten China's entire economy. Jean-Francois Demelio, president of the Asia Center in Paris, says not since China's turn to capitalism in the 1980s has it been weaker economically than it is now.
Of course, this is something which is not really publicized, and Xi Jinping's regime does everything to conceal that. But the main threat to the economy, which was the massive amount of debt, especially debt related to real estate, is now popping up. Real estate is about the only way to invest money in China. Of course, you have the stock market, but the stock market does not necessarily inspire a lot of trust for investors.
On the foreign policy front, China was humiliated in May when 10 Pacific Island nations in the region rejected China's proposed security pact, worried it was a scheme to pull them into Beijing's orbit. Even China's relationship with the European Union has gone bad, with the EU and China slapping sanctions on each other over China's human rights abuses. Now, nearly 1 in 4 European companies say they may shift their investments out of China. China's biggest problem, however, may be its population crisis, one that is far worse than we've been told. University of Wisconsin researcher Yi Fuxian has been studying China's population data and says Beijing has been overstating its population size for years, and that its population has been shrinking since 2018 and is already more than 100 million smaller than India's. China's fertility rate is believed to be as low as 1, less than half the replacement rate for a population. Recently, the Chinese website Mia.com, a multi-million-dollar startup selling supplies to new mothers, shut down its app, suggesting business is not very good.
If you tell people for almost 40 years that babies are burdens and not blessings, if you tell them they'd be better off not having children or stopping at one, guess what? That has a real-world impact. So last June, they went to a 3-child policy, hoping again for a baby boom. They haven't gotten it. The birth rate continues to fall.
D'Amelio says when it comes to its economic problems, Chinese leaders could find a way out.
It's an economy which is run from the center, and they always find solutions.
But there's no indication the government has figured out a way to prevent a demographic disaster that could end Beijing's dream of dominating the world.
The United States grew wealthy before it began growing old. China is still a relatively poor country. It will grow old while it's still poor.
In 2019, at the 70th anniversary of the founding of Communist China, President Xi Jinping boasted to the world that nothing can stop the Chinese nation. He was wrong. There are a number of forces that are doing exactly that. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Finally tonight, a Philadelphia nonprofit is combating the rise in gun violence across the country by keeping kids active and teaching them a new skill.
Local boxing champ Dwayne Fletcher is offering classes on the fundamentals of the sport. The free program is appropriately called Guns Down, Gloves Up. Fletcher started the group to teach kids some of the biggest lessons learned in the boxing ring: discipline, self-control, empowerment, and how to come back from a mistake. Fletcher says Guns Down, Gloves Up also helps create a safe space where kids can interact with others in the community. I think those are good lifelong lessons for any kid at any age.
I agree. What a great thing to do.
Absolutely. You're taking the fundamentals of boxing and applying them to the rigors and challenges of life.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for watching Faith Nation.
We'll see you tomorrow.